We're about a minute away, everyone. Just letting you know.
Okay.
There's about 130 participants right now.
I switched to my headpiece. Is the volume clearer or better now?
I think it's clear, yes.
Yes.
Okay. It normally is, so I wanted to keep my battery charged, so.
Well, Maria, you want to get started?
I will. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Dennison, and I'm the Regional Director for the Small Business Development Center out of Seward County Community College in Liberal, Kansas. And I want to welcome all of you to today's webinar, The Employer's Guide to COVID-19. The purpose of this webinar is to provide a walkthrough of the basics of today's employment situation in regard to the pandemic, and it's meant to provide a practical workspace guidance for the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, some guidance on workplace law, best practices, and an OSHA deep dive. It's also a platform for employers to ask questions on how COVID-19 affects small business. Our presenter today is Tim Davis with Costangy Brooks Smith and Profit. I came to know Tim through our SHRM, which is a Society of Human Resource Management. He is one of our trainers and just a trusted partner of the organization. I'm going to hand it over to Tim to let him give you a brief bio and to get us started. Tim?
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria. And welcome everybody who's able to join. I'm going to be very brief in my bio. And I'm going to currently leave this first screen up here as we do the introductions. My name is Tim Davis. I am a partner at Costangy Brooks Smith and Profit. My contact information, if you have follow-up questions or concerns that you need to discuss specific to your organization after we get off of this, then please don't hesitate to use those numbers. I'm coming to you today from our office in the Kansas City area. I live in Overland Park, Kansas, but I am currently under a quarantine. For those of you who haven't seen what's happened in Kansas City, we do have a shelter of home order here, but I am able to come into my office to maintain a steady connection. So that's where I'm at today, overlooking downtown Kansas City, which is a ghost town like I've never seen. So it's very interesting. One thing I want everybody to look at is to look at the date in the bottom right-hand corner of your slide. This law is moving so fast, and the changes in our economy and the world are moving so fast, including the CARES Act, which we anticipate being signed into law sometime today or tomorrow, which will provide significant opportunities for almost everybody, I would assume, on this call to obtain funding and compensation from the federal government to get through this crisis. I'm going to talk about that briefly, but I'm not going to be able to cover it. Obviously, it's not the law yet. The SBA and the SBDC will be very much involved with the process for obtaining that kind of financial support and relief. So the people that are on this call with me will be excellent sources. And if you have questions as we go forward, we'll be analyzing this law for our clients as well. But unfortunately, they did not get that done yesterday or the day before as we'd hoped, so we cannot cover that in great detail today. Just so that we have a little context here, this is me for those of you who haven't met before. As Maria said, I do a tremendous amount of legal work for companies and employers out throughout the state of Kansas. So I hope a lot of my friends and clients are on the call today and look forward to working with anybody who's new. I want to start by talking about what's on our agenda today. We're going to cover the basics of COVID-19. I know there's a diverse group on here. I hate to say it, but I've spent probably the last 5 or 6 days, including the weekend, laying people off. which is not good. With the customers and clients I work with, I probably have had about 250,000 people laid off that I assisted with over the week. So I've got clients that are on that end of the spectrum where this health crisis and corresponding economic crisis is devastating their business. If you wanted to come to the downtown Marriott here in Kansas City to spend the night, they're closed. That is about 400 employees and a 700-room hotel that is currently closed and will not reopen until things change or the economic circumstances change. Similarly, I do a lot of work in the automotive industry, and with General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and all of the other kind of transplants shutting down, the OEM, the original equipment manufacturers and suppliers, are also shutting down. So it's been probably, quite frankly, the worst week of my career in terms of what I've had to do to focus on letting people go, temporarily, of course, or furloughing them. It's just been awful. On the other end of the spectrum, I represent a lot of healthcare clients who are in the opposite end. They are just overwhelmed trying to get people hired, getting people in the door, doing what they can to help the health care side of this crisis get done. I'm also working with a huge number of small businesses around the country that are trying to do what they can to keep their doors open temporarily rather than going into some sort of layoff or shutdown, so that they can maintain the continuity of their business and the operations. That is where the CARES Act that hopefully, again, will be signed into law today or tomorrow should have a significant impact on everybody on this call to possibly provide payroll reimbursement 100% if you stay open during this process. So really stay tuned to that as we go forward. What I'm going to do is try and cover the COVID basics, what's going on, the latest on some of the science, practical workplace guidance, the brand new Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which I believe everybody on this call, if you have fewer than 500 employees, you will be covered by this unless there's a possibility you get accepted out of that if coverage under this law would place your business in jeopardy. So I'm going to cover that in some detail because that would apply to all of you, and it is brand new. And then I'm going to try and cover some of the questions that I've been getting from my clients throughout this crisis that we're dealing with, and deal with that, and spend a little time, not an excessive amount of time, talking about the OSHA impact. As we go through the program, I'm going to do my best at the end to cover the questions that you might have. Quite frankly, I did a program like this yesterday that had about 3,000 attendees, and they had 500 questions. We could not cover all those questions in an hour and a half program. So I will do my best on the call as we get those, and Maria, I think, will be funneling those to me at the end or as we go along if there's one that we need to address. But I will do my best to try and cover those in the time that we have, with the understanding that I do have another program like this that starts at noon, and then another one like this that starts at 3 o'clock, where I'm trying to cover employers all over the country because this is an emergency and they need the advice now. So trying to get it covered. So I hope you understand. I just might not be able to get to it all today. As we're talking about it, here is the very latest. I've got a few slides here on the COVID crisis itself, in case you're starting to feel that impact. With what is going on around the country with the social distancing and trying to stay 6 feet away from each other, and trying to not touch any kind of surface that somebody else might have been in contact to for about 72 hours is what they're recommending. The goal is to get in front of this thing and shut it down in terms of the community spread that is going on. That is obviously what is happening in the business world and why so many places are shut down. You've heard a lot of talk about when will we go back to normal in the United States, and that is currently unknown. We just don't know when the social distancing things will pull things under control. In New York City, a hot spot. In Florida, a hot spot. In Seattle, a hot spot. They unfortunately are going to be going through the worst of this crisis because it caught them before social distancing could have an impact, and they are going to have significant numbers of people that test positive, significant numbers of people in the hospitals, and unfortunately a significant number of fatalities involved. With my Kansas clients, and luckily we've kept those numbers pretty small so far, and hopefully we can keep it that way. if you do have it, I'm going to put this up here just so you know. I spend a lot of my time now counseling clients who have gone through their day one. And what we call their day one is when they get an employee or a significant a family member of an employee or somebody that they've been exposed to, and they get that call saying, I'm a first degree separation. I've been exposed myself. I'm a second degree separation, whatever the case may be, to somebody who tested positive or who has these symptoms that you're seeing up here today. What is your plan if that happens to you is a question that you all at some point might need to be asked. If you have an employee who has a fever, cough, shortness of breath, what is your plan if that were to occur to you? It's surprising to me in light of what's going on right now, the different places I'm getting those kinds of calls. I've dealt with it in Kansas. Our numbers are fairly small, thankfully, but I've been dealing with it a lot in other states. For example, in the state of Washington, where I do a lot of work, out in rural Washington, there's been people that have come up with this virus and they really have no idea where they got it. Clearly, it may have came from the Seattle area with a traveler or something like that, but more rural areas are better off under this, but they're by no means immune to it. And we're going to have to figure out what you would do with your day one if we get it. The good news is 98% of the people who acquire this virus will survive. The vast majority of those people will not even have significant symptoms. The goal that we're trying to do right now with this COVID-19 and the social distancing is to protect those that are at risk and minimize the impact on the hospitals so we can get them health care coverage during this period. That impact is obviously having a huge corresponding impact on the economics, and that's what we're going to try and address and discuss today. What we're telling most people, based on the science and based on the current economic situations that we're all dealing with, is you should expect some level of disruption for the next 12 months. Whether you have a major disruption because you have your day one with an employee who tests positive or has the symptoms and you've got to go into some sort of unique operating mode at your place of business for a while, and there you're severely disrupted. Or whether you're just dealing with a decline in your business due to COVID-19, or whether you're dealing with what you do when you've got your employees who call in absent starting April 2nd because they can take paid FMLA leave under these new laws. We're all going to have different levels of impact on it, and that is why every call I feel that it's a new and unique challenge that I'm dealing with, because I really have to understand my client's business, get to know what their unique challenges are, and then try to fit their problems into the multitude of laws that we're dealing with that we're going to try and go through today. But in general, this whole flattening the curve and social distancing may not mean that we get through this crisis without a significant portion of the population that get this illness. And if we do, we may not have the big wave coming in like a tsunami. That's what we're trying to avoid now. We will just have successive small waves of outbreaks of the illness that comes in. So that we just have to deal with it. This illness is going to be around until a vaccine is developed, which they're saying is 12 to 18 months away, until the world and the U.S. develops a herd resistance, which would mean herd resistance is based on 80% of a population having been exposed and developing the immunity to the condition. Obviously, we want to avoid that, or at least spread that out significantly. But that is why this crisis isn't going to be one that we get to Easter, as some are saying, get through 14 days and the world's going to be going back to normal. We really need to have a plan on what we're going to do, both health-wise and economically, over the next 12 months. The analogy I've been using as we talk about it is this is a gopher and the snake for all of us. We got to survive and get past this initial bubble that we're going to be in, and then plan our business and our future based on what laws and what economic relief is available to us as we get to the other side of that crisis. And that is a lot about what we're going to try and cover today. What I'm telling my clients is you can't have a plan today that you just plug it and play it and it's going to work for the next 12 months. You could have a plan today that you think is fine. Tomorrow, one of your employees tests positive or is in contact with somebody, and now what do you do for your operation? Do you go to a full quarantine for 14 days? Probably not. Do you do a partial quarantine where that person is sent home Anybody they had direct contact with is sent home. You sanitize your workplace, and you continue operating as much as possible, probably so. As the law may change, you might have to change your plan. So everything we talk about today, keep in mind it's just a roadmap. You're going to have to maybe take a few diversions along the way with your business as we go through it, and as the rules and the laws and things change. They've likened it to whack-a-mole. Right now, the moles that we are trying to whack as a country are in the big metropolitan areas of New York, Seattle. You're going to soon hear about major crises and major death rates, unfortunately, in Los Angeles and San Francisco. But thankfully, most people on this call are immune to that. But at some point, it may come to your area, and you'll have to figure out how we deal with it based on this guidance. As we go through the day today, I do want to point out that there are some fantastic websites out there that if you have basic questions on these things, you should consult. The CDC is probably the best website for what do you do if you have questions about the virus itself. What do you do if an employee tests positive in terms of making your workplace as safe as possible? You will see there's guidance on there that you send the employee home for 14 days. It is total legal to do that. If you've got employees that have traveled to certain areas, as you know, in the state of Kansas, the governor has said if they come back from certain areas, which are listed on the Kansas website, you should tell them they don't come back to work for 14 days for you until they get through a quarantine period. So there's fantastic guidance on what you do if you have your day one or you are concerned about your day one with somebody who may be testing positive on that. The law that we're getting ready to talk about, last night, they added a new Q&A to the website. So most of these Q&As have already been incorporated in there, but when you see 4 bullets down on this slide, the website, I added it on here with the questions under the Families First Corona Response Act. A lot of those are on there, but again, I tried to answer those in the program. The reason I put that click on there is they're going to be updating that as we go through and we get more guidance under these new laws. So that is something you can always reach back to if you do not have employment counsel or you can't reach me or whatever, as this changes, to see if there's a unique aspect on how it applies to your business. OSHA.gov is good. If your operation has people in many states, that next site below it is tracking the various legal changes that are occurring in different states. So for example, if your state that you might have an employee in is waiving the unemployment waiting period if you're going to have to lay somebody off, you can track and see if they might get those benefits for that. So that kind of stuff will be available. By the way, I haven't tracked the Q&As, and I should have said this up front, so I apologize for not doing that. All of these PowerPoint slides will be available to everybody on this program. I think that Maria or Paul will make those available directly. If not, you can send me an email, and I can email these to you as well. So these are the websites that you can be monitoring. At the very bottom is our firm website. We have developed a coronavirus response task force, and we've got a coronavirus link that is, we are just sending update after update as things change, and you can go to our firm website, and all of these ones I've cited, we've connected links to all these other places. So we're really trying to be a catch-all resource for small businesses and other businesses that if you go there, you can click and get the questions answered. We update that constantly. We sent over 20 bulletins out to clients in unique industries or with unique questions yesterday, and then we populate those to our website so you can grab all of that information if you do have questions, with the understanding that I think many of you on this call might have very unique questions that are specific to you. So really quickly where we are now, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. Right now we are in a social distancing goal of snuffing this out. Personal hygiene, six feet apart. Don't monitor areas where people might have access for 72 hours and sanitize those areas because the virus could live for that long. Gatherings of fewer than 10 people. Shelter at home quarantines in some locales. I am currently in one of those, the 4-county area, including Johnson and Wyandotte in Kansas, and then Kansas City, Missouri, and Jackson County is the one in our state. Wichita is doing some similar things down there. Bars and the restaurants are obviously closed. If any of you are in that industry, they're on here unless it's for takeout or delivery. travel restrictions are being imposed and the encouragement that we don't overstock. What should we be doing with our employees now? The main thing we've got to do is constantly keep our employees informed and reassured that we have a plan on getting through this crisis. They are going to be very, very worried about, am I going to keep my job? Am I at risk to health if I come to work? Those kinds of things. And I've established for our office, I'm the only one that's reported into our office in Kansas City for the last 2 weeks. I've got everybody working remotely at home, and I know our offices all around the country are doing the same. So we've developed communication structures to keep people informed and engaged so that we can alleviate those concerns as much as possible. If you are still operating, what are you recommend to be doing? Separate your employees, obviously, again, to the extent possible. Significantly enhance cleaning and sanitation. Not really most PPE. Most of you should not have employees, depending on your industry and what they're doing, wearing masks and stuff. That is not what this should be all about at this point. If you can have people work from home, obviously that is highly encouraged right now, if your technology allows it. We sent everybody home with computers here. We set up Microsoft Teams so that we could have employees all on one kind of group that we keep everybody in touch. We're trying to do that as well. I'm going to talk a little bit when we get to the legal section here in a second about attendance, time off, and things you could do there as well. But what could you be doing if you are operating as we go through this first wave? Here I want to focus on the compliance now. If you go through your day one that I've talked about before, what is your plan? And again, if you need to talk about it after we get off this call, let me know. If you get an employee who has tested positive or has the symptoms, or if they tell you, I spent an entire day with a client yesterday, that client notified me today that they have been tested positive. That actually happened to our law firm, and we've had 2 lawyers go out into quarantine for the 14 days of that period where we put them out. We talked to all employees in our office that they might have interacted with. If there was significant interaction, we also had those individuals go into a quarantine. We had our office space completely sanitized. Any area that hasn't had interaction with it for 72 hours should be good according to the guidelines. So those are the kind of things you will need to do as you're going through it. You will also need a plan for dealing with your at-risk employees. Many of you, if you haven't already, are going to get questions from somebody who is in the more at-risk age groups or has a health condition personally or a family member with a health condition saying, is it okay if I just stay home for this time period? And you're going to have to decide what you do. You may say, yes, I can put you on a furlough and you can stay at home, in which case if you can't allow them to work remote because your business just doesn't allow and that what they do doesn't allow, they may be eligible to remain on your benefits. They may be eligible to draw unemployment at this new enhanced amount that's coming through the CARES Act. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Let me take a drink here. And you may be able to decide if you, excuse me, continue paying them during this time, or they go unpaid if you go unemployment, something like that. So you're going to have a lot of those questions that come up from your at-risk employees or others that want to stay at home. How are you going to handle recent travelers? As I said earlier, in the state of Kansas, we've got an order from our governor that if people go to certain locations, which you can see right now, it's 4 counties in Colorado, Seattle, New York, those are high-risk places. You're supposed to tell those employees they need to quarantine at home for 14 days. And if they come back with no symptoms, then they're fine. Those are the things that we are currently under. For those of you who are not coming to me from, say, Wyandotte or Johnson County here in Kansas, where we're under a work from home or let's not go out in public for the time being. So what are we going to do? If you're at a shelter from home order like those 2 counties I mentioned that I know under, there are multiple exceptions for those who are essential businesses. I've been working with several small businesses here in our area that are part of the critical infrastructure. They make plastic components that are being used to make ventilators. Obviously, it doesn't get any more critical than that. They get to and need to be coming to work. I work with a huge number of veterinary organizations. And those veterinary organizations are considered essential providers as well, even though they're not providing, obviously, health care to humans. So even if you get a shelter from home order that is statewide in Kansas, which I hope we don't have. I hope we just don't go through that. But if we do, check to see if your business is essential. And if so, you could ask your employees to continue coming to work. Oftentimes, I've been getting questions from, if that is the case, do they have to have a letter saying they could come to the work? The answer is no. So far in Johnson and Wyandotte County, there is no letter requirement showing that you work at a place that's considered essential. The police are not pulling people over as they're driving in. Would it be something that you could consider just with a simple letter saying, I work at XYZ company. We have been deemed essential by the core four, as they call it here in the Kansas City area, and so I'm going to work. You could do that, but you don't need to. If you can't operate at all, how are you going to handle layoffs or furloughs? How are you going to cover your business? Can't help you with that as much here because that's something you're going to have to think about with your own thing. How are you doing things like mail orders, delivery, security? All of those are items you're going to have to think about to keep your place operating. The subsequent waves that are coming, and the big one I'm about to talk about is a wave that's going to hit April 2nd. How are you going to staff once we go into these new laws that apply to, I believe, everybody on this call, and you will be able to see the qualifying if it doesn't. You are going to have many employees that are going to take time off. How do you staff during that? If you are one of those that is going to have to go through layoffs because your business just can't make it, and the CARES Act, which you're going to see coming into law over the next 24 to 48 hours, might have a significant impact on whether you do lay somebody off or furlough them. Those kind of things are going to be out there. But that is something that you might have to ask, and every client is different. I've been talking to everyone. If they say, okay, we're thinking about a furlough, we're thinking about a layoff, what should we do here? Should we reduce hours? Should we furlough people? Should we lay people off? Should we close the doors entirely? What can we do with regard to unemployment? What can we do with regard to health insurance? What can we do with regard to use of our PTO? All of these are very good questions that you will be asking yourself if we do go into a shelter at home in your area, or you just need to temporarily suspend your operations because your business has disappeared. Talk to your lawyers about that if you're really going down those positions so that you can really figure out what's best for your unique business concerns, because yours could be completely different than everybody else's. If you're a restaurant, you may not be able to make it. You may have to temporarily close if you're not getting the kind of takeout and delivery orders. If you're in manufacturing and you've got to provide critical things, you got to figure out how we keep everything going. So it's all going to be different in all of these respects. So let's get into it right now. Last week, Congress passed the first law. I'm going to start covering all of the new laws and the old laws that apply to your situations as employers. But last week, Congress passed what they call the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It is an obligation on everybody that is covered under the law, and that basically means every single employer that has fewer than 500 employees is covered by that. Since this is through the Small Business Association and the SBDC, most of you are probably going to be in that category, and I would be very surprised if any of you are not. But what it's going to do is create a paid time off obligation that I will cover in 100% detail in a second for your employees. It does not make all aspects of the FMLA apply to you. So if you do not have more than 50 employees total, the rest of the Family and Medical Leave Act doesn't apply to you. It just creates this brand new obligation. The Department of Labor is getting ready to issue regulations. We do not have them yet. We did get guidance last night through a Q&A, which I told you is available in that link that I attached above, to some of the questions. But again, I covered those in this program, so you shouldn't have to refer to that for the most part. But it is there. We are going to get more guidance from the Department of Labor shortly on different questions. Write this down. This law kicks in at midnight on April 1st, so really it becomes effective April 2nd. April 2 is the date that it applies. It expires and ceases to exist as a law at the end of this year. So this is all going to affect stuff over the next basically 8 months, 9 months on how you try to cover this issue, and then it will go away. So what does it cover? Employers with fewer than 500 employees are covered by this. If you're part of a larger corporation somehow, and like a subsidiary or something like that, that where you may hit the 500, you need to be talking with people that are in your corporate umbrella to see if you have more than 500, but that again is highly unlikely here. In addition, the Secretary of Labor can exempt your businesses if you have fewer than 50 employees, if you can demonstrate that providing the benefits I'm getting ready to talk about would jeopardize your business. That is going to be an extremely, extremely narrow exception. The main reason is 100% of what you pay employees under this thing are going to be reimbursed by the federal government. This is not going to cost you any money. However, if you can demonstrate to have employees that are absent from work would mean you could not continue to operate. If they take leave under this, then that could be an instance, and I'll talk about that in a second. What is this law going to require you to do April 1st or April 2nd? Provide paid FMLA leave and paid sick days. Those are going to be two different things. So I'm going to cover them each in a second, but make a note on your thing. Paid FMLA is extremely narrow, and 90% of you might not ever have to do that. Paid sick days is more broad and is really designed to cover people that are exposed to the virus in some fashion. So you may very well have to do that, and you may see that. People who take this kind of leave, there's going to be prohibitions against terminating them and restoring them to their prior job. As I said, there's a process where you're going to get all of the money you paid for people to take leave back to you so that you do not have to cover that out of your own pockets. There is going to be a posting requirement. So between now and April 2nd, be aware that you need to log on to the Department of Labor website and download the poster that they're going to say have to be posted in all workplaces and put that up on the wall where you normally put posters. It isn't out yet. You can't do it yet, but be ready for that. This law is also going to provide for free testing if people suspect once we get enough test kits and enhanced unemployment grants to the states. The good thing about the CARES Act that just is going to get passed today is they are going to bump up unemployment. So if you do unfortunately have to push people out to unemployment, there's a substantial likelihood that they are going to get up to 100% of their pay through unemployment as opposed to the percent or the caps or whatever otherwise normally applies. So the federal government is rushing to our aid and our assistance and our employees' aid and assistance to try and get us through this troubled patch we're on right now. Good news from the DOL. Just last night, they said, we're not going to strictly enforce this law right now. We're not going to come after companies and try and hammer them if for some reason they're struggling to comply with it. They want to help us comply and get through it. So my goal is to get the information so you don't have to worry about noncompliance, but if you cannot or do not comply for some reason, they're not going to come after you hard immediately on this. So here's the small employer exception I talked about. If you're one of those businesses that believes providing this leave would jeopardize your organization, they last night issued this guidance on how you would go about doing that and what you should not do. This is all we've got so far, folks, so I wish I could give you more guidance on exactly what's out there, but this information came directly from that Q&A that is on that website I referenced above. There will be more information to follow, but this is all we've got right now on what you should or should not do if you believe you're going to be in that category whose business would be jeopardized by providing these benefits that I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about what this really means. The emergency paid FMLA leave, it becomes law on April 2nd. Any employee of yours who's worked for you for 30 days will be eligible to take this leave. They can take up to 12 weeks of job protected leave. This 12 weeks of leave, I apologize for the typo there and the uncertain but likely, is going to be set aside if any of you are 50 employees or larger. If they've already taken FMLA leave for other events, that would reduce the amount that they could take for this event. So it is a total of 12 for all FMLA events for those of you who are larger and who are covered. There is a waiting period of 10 days that an employee could not get pay, but as you're going to see in a second, that's going to be coordinated with the paid sick days entitlement because there is some overlap here. And if they take paid sick days for the first 10 days, they could then take 10 weeks off for paid FMLA. Here is the pay rate. If they take paid FMLA leave, they get paid at no less than 2/3 their usual pay for normally scheduled hours for that week. If they're a 40-hour employee, then they get 2/3 of their normal. If they're a part-time and only work 20 hours, then you do the math on however it would be based on how many hours they normally work. There is a pay cap. The total you would have to pay out per employee per day would be either the lesser of 2/3 their normal pay or $200. Max they could get per person would be $10,000. The law does not allow you to tell an employee, well, before we're going to put you out on paid FMLA, you have to use all of your vacation or your sick time or your personal days or however you accrue those kind of paid time off benefits. They have the legal right to take this leave first and preserve those kinds of benefits for later if they so choose. However, if they want to use paid vacation for that 10-day waiting period or something like that, you could allow them to do that. You just cannot force them to do that as this kicks in. What is the qualifying event? And this is why this is so very, very narrow. This leave, the paid FMLA leave, is only if somebody cannot do their job, whether that's in person or at home. So if you say, hey, go work from home, your job is my billing person or my accounting person. You can do that at home 100%. Go do it from home, and I expect you to keep working. You can tell them that. If for some reason they've got a lot of kids or something that would distract them and prevent them from being able to work, then we should talk about that. But in general, if they can do their job at home, you can say, I need you working, do your job, you're not on leave, you're just working. But if they cannot do that because the kids have been kicked out of school, and that has happened for the rest of the school year here in Kansas, or their daycare or child care center is closed and won't take kids because of a COVID-19 emergency, such as we're in, because we're in a state of emergency in Kansas, and the governor has ordered people to do these things, these employees could take leave for this reason. Again, a very, very narrow event. It is not for other FMLA events. It is just if the employee has to be at home to care for a child under 18 because the school closed or their daycare closed because of this emergency, as we know has happened. So that is paid FMLA leave. That is the first requirement. That is all summarized in this chart right here, that when you see emergency FMLA expansion, this is the leave due to a child care or school or daycare closes. And I tried to walk you through it visually on how this would all work on this chart. The chart doesn't add anything to what I said. It's just a way of looking at it and seeing it for those of you who are more visual than textual on how you analyze things. Next is the emergency paid sick leave law. These are the paid sick hours. This also becomes effective April 1. It also applies to the same size employers. However, everybody's eligible. You don't have to have worked for your company for 30 days. Everybody's eligible on day 1 after April 1. What do people get? 80 hours of paid sick days or sick time or sick hours, however you do it. The pay is different here, however. Here, employees get the lesser of their regular rate of pay if they're out for their own illness, or $511 per day, up to a max of $5,110. That's 10 days, as you can do the math. If it's for something that isn't related to one of their own personal illness, such as you're going to see they're caring for others, then the max is different. They get $200, 2/3 rate of pay, up to $200, or a max of $2,000. Once again, you cannot reduce other paid time benefits for this. You can't make them use their vacation. You can't make them use their PTO. And there is no carryover over these paid sick hours into 2021. If they need it in 2020, great, it's here for them, but it doesn't continue into 2021. It does expire. What are the qualifying events? They are significantly different than the paid FMLA leave. This is designed to get relief to employers and employees who have people out because they are subject to a quarantine. In the Kansas City area, we are subject to a quarantine or isolation order. So as of April 1, if your employees have to stay home, then they could get paid sick time because they are subject to a quarantine order. And they could draw their pay, as I just outlined it, for 80 hours worth for full-time and whatever the part-time would be. They are also eligible for this in other areas of the state. For example, if they are advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, if they are told they've got the symptoms and they need to go home and there's no test available and you need to stay at home and self-quarantine, then they can get paid the sick days for this. Alternatively, if an employee is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking medical diagnosis, going to the doctor, hey, I've got the fever, I've got a cough, I've got shortness of breath, I need to take time off to go get medical attention, they can take those time off and get paid this amount. Those are the first three that are covered by the higher level of reimbursement, the $511 amounts. That's an employee seeking time off because they have their own situation. The next ones are if they are caring for somebody. So if an employee needs to take time off because they're caring for somebody, or somebody who has a healthcare provider is said to self-quarantine, like a child or somebody, then they get to take that time off. This one does not have to be a child, though, by the way. If they have an elderly parent or somebody with a health condition, if they have to take time off to care for that individual, they could take it for them as well. Again, if they're doing that, then it is at the lower amount of $200 per day as opposed to the higher amount of $511 today. The next item is the one that overlaps with the paid FMLA. This is if a child is kicked out of school because the school is closed, as we know in Kansas is happening, or if the daycare provider is closed. That would also count for these paid sick hours, and they could take that paid for those first 2 weeks or 80 hours here, and then they could roll that to paid FMLA leave if it continues to be a need for leave for them. The last one is if the Secretary of Labor says we've got this unique event coming up, so we're going to issue more. This one is more of a catch-all if the Secretary of Labor does something. So just wait, and that's one you might have further guidance on if that were to pop up. But those are the two new laws that have just become effective, or actually will become effective April 1. So not now, but be prepared for that. What is your day one plan if you've got employees that are going to be able to take paid leave or have one of these qualified events to take paid sick hours? How are you going to do that, cover that pay through your payroll system? How are you going to do that to track what you provide so you can then get reimbursed or not pay that amount? Same visual that we had here. This is the chart for the paid sick hours or sick leave as opposed to paid FMLA for the 2 weeks, that hopefully those of you that are visual could walk through that pretty easily. Here's the financial assistance, folks. Here is what you can get reimbursed. It's the paid time off is 100% refundable, excuse me, through tax credits. So the way they're saying you're doing that is you would subtract whatever amount you owe from your payroll taxes, the amount that you've paid in paid sick leave. So if for this period of time, your next payroll, you owe $8,000 in payroll taxes, but you paid $5,000 in paid benefits under this law, all you would pay to the IRS right now is $3,000. They're doing that so that it's a real quick turn of things so that you get the money immediately back and don't have to apply for some sort of reimbursement through the IRS, et cetera, to do that. However, if you've paid out more in leave than you would get back through the payroll by not paying that, then there is a way that you're going to be able to get an expedited refund of that amount from the IRS. It's supposed to be available within 2 weeks. So the financial burdens of this law should be minimal. You need to start talking to your accountants about this immediately if you think you're going to have issues with getting that turnaround in cash flow. But this is it is designed to be a non-financial event for most employers. Could it be a hardship if you've got more employees out on leave and you have to plan how you do your business? Absolutely, without a doubt, that could occur. But financially, this should be fairly seamless. So that takes me to the new law, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on the CARES Act. The Senate approved it last night. There are great resources that are going to be available to you through the SBA and the SBDC on what this really means. As it was pending, and again, I'm not going to cover this because I do not want to run the risk of confusing people. As it was pending, it was written for people in your organization or your situations to have various venues to get financial relief. The biggest one would be that you could take out a loan of up to $10 million that could cover your costs of your payroll, your rent, and your mortgage for approximately 2.5 months. And those loans, as I understand it, as it was before, would be 100% forgivable, which means you don't have to pay them back. So that is a huge deal for you to keep operating as you go through this process. So again, I'm not going to say any more than that, but everything I've talked about may be insignificant as compared to this one slide, depending on what that final law says. Once they sign it into law, once the House passes it, once the president signs that, hopefully within the next 24 to 48 hours. So stay tuned to whatever your news provider is. Talk to your accountants, talk to the SBA, log onto our website. We will be doing those websites. So whatever your law firm is, I'm sure they're doing the same, and get this information because it will be critical. So I'm going to move on now in the next time that we've got and try to cover the other laws in a lot of the common questions that I am getting from my clients on how do we deal with this various stuff that is coming up with this crisis. I'm going to try and again, once we get to the end here, and I apologize for that, I'm going to try and kick this over so that Maria or Paul can get me whatever questions are coming in as we go along and answer those. So stay tuned for that as well. One of the biggest questions I'm getting, and for most people on this call, it should not apply to you. What if we're going to close or lay off people for 6 months? Hopefully with the CARES Act, that is going to release the pressure on businesses so this doesn't apply. But for almost everybody on this call, the WARN Act does not apply to you because you're too small and you're not going to be having a layoff of more than 6 months, even if it does. So I am not going to spend much time on this because I don't think this is going to be a WARN event for most of you. And by the way, WARN is that notice that you have to give employees if you are going to close. So I am not going to talk about that much more. If you think this is going to have long-term impacts and you might have that situation, then you're going to need to be talking to your counsel about this situation. Again, highly unlikely. However, if you are going to have to suspend your operations, and I hope that's not the case, or if you're going to have to lay people off or furlough them. And the difference between a furlough and a layoff is typically furlough just means, hey guys, until further notice, I don't need you reporting to work, but I'm going to keep you on my payroll. The good thing about that is you might not have to issue COBRA and have their health insurance. It also may allow them to be taking advantage of these paid FMLA events that we just talked about here. So many of my clients are electing to furlough people as opposed to terminating them or laying them off so that you maintain the relationship with your employees. They still are eligible to go out and get unemployment benefits if you do that, but you may not have to COBRA them for their health insurance if you provide health insurance to them. Big word of advice here. If you are furloughing or laying employees off, coordinate with your health insurance provider and talk to them about what impact this will have on your employees. Do they have to be COBRA'd? Probably not, but some of your health care plans may be different. So big word of advice, if you are going to have to lay people off or furlough them and reduce their hours, talk to your health insurance provider about what impact that has on their health insurance coverage. If you are union, which I doubt there are very many in this call, so I'm not going to talk about that. If you're union, give me a call and you're planning on doing something, you're going to have to update that. If you're laying people off, the discrimination laws would apply and say, hey, you can't lay off the old people, you can't lay off the women, everything that you would normally going through if you have a layoff, you have to think about that as well. The very great news that we've got if you're going to be going through layoffs is the unemployment benefits are going to be significantly enhanced under the CARES law and under Kansas state law. So you're going to see that we are going to be able to try and maintain the economic viability of our employees through this process if worst case scenario is you do have to go through a layoff. So let's talk about if you have to send somebody home. Do you have to pay people? If they're non-exempt hourly people and you have to send them home because you just don't have any work for them, for example, and you don't have something you could do to keep them working, then you don't have to pay them for those hours worked. The hourly people, you just don't have to do that. If they're exempt salaried employees, though, there are some rules about that. If they don't work anytime, if you have them laid off for an entire work week or furloughed, you would not owe them any of their salary for that work week. And that is a work week specific issue, not a calendar week issue. And if you have questions about what that means, then we need to talk about that. If you're going to say, hey, rather than lay you off, what we're going to do is we're going to have you work for 3 days a week. And for the other 2 days, you can use your PTO to supplement that. That is okay as well. And if they run out of PTO and you're having them work 3 days, then we do have an issue that you couldn't reduce their salary. You would have to reinstate them to their full salary or lay them off for a full work week after that, if that is a route you go. Again, keep in mind, this whole CARES Act thing is designed for you to keep people at their full salary potentially and then get reimbursed from that through an SBA loan so you don't have people losing these economic incomes. So monitor, that's why I say, sorry about those interruptions, folks, I just getting a lot of calls. Monitor the CARES Act and see if that not laying somebody off or not furloughing people is an alternative for you so that you could then keep them at work and then get the money back. Other employers are doing things like, what if we just want to change their salary? This is going to have a long-term impact on their business. Our business model and what we do provides for direct interactions with the public. We simply can't do anything because the public is all staying at home. If the CARES Act doesn't provide relief, you could consider something with your salaried people of saying, okay, going forward, for the time being, we are going to convert you to hourly. And until we get through this crisis, you're no longer salaried, you're paid hourly just like everybody else, and you're going to get your regular salary divided by 20/80 or however you would do that math. Or you could say, we're going to keep you salaried and you're going to just continue to need to work as needed, but we're going to reduce the salary to 80% or 60% of what you used to pay going forward. And until this crisis ends, your salary is going to be the new amount. Now, it needs to be above the minimum threshold for the white collar exemptions. And again, we can cover that in more detail if you have those questions. But there are options for you if you have to send people home and the CARES Act doesn't provide the relief you would need to keep them at work. So I'm going to move on to the FMLA. I'm not going to spend much time here because I think most of the people on this call do have fewer than 50 employees. If you do have 50 or more employees, the other aspects of the FMLA would apply. So if they need to take the paid FMLA leave because it's one of the qualifying events we just talked about under the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, then they could take their paid portion. And then if they continue to have a serious health condition that is covered by the FMLA, then you may have to provide them with unpaid leave as well. So for example, I have had multiple employers call, I've got an employee who has severe anxiety and they are terrified about getting this illness, and so they want to take leave right now so that they don't come to work and get exposed to that. Is that a qualifying event for FMLA leave? And the short answer to that is if their doctor says this situation is triggering a flare-up in their severe anxiety and they can't come to work, then yes, they may very well have FMLA leave where they could stay at home. Now, it might be unpaid because it doesn't qualify under the law, but they could take that time off. Keep track of that, particularly as we go through this. I think it's going to be very, very limited for people on this call, but monitor that as we go. If you have employees in other states, be aware Kansas doesn't, but other states such as California have very, very detailed FMLA laws that would apply different rules as well. Can an employee stay home under FMLA leave to avoid getting it? Generally, this is not an excused reason unless somebody, as I said, has an acute health condition already that this could cause a flare-up. So no, if somebody just wants to stay home, for the most part, you can say, I need you at work, friend. I got to have you here. I'm sorry, but I need you here. You cannot take leave and you cannot be absent from work. It would just be considered an unexcused absence. Now, I encourage you not to do that. I encourage you to be as flexible as possible. But all your businesses are different, so I'm not going to tell you you cannot do something if you've got a business need to do it and an employee doesn't have a legitimate reason not to come to work. It's just based on their concern or fear. If you've got an 80-year-old employee who has COPD and is concerned about coming to work because your business involves direct interface with the public, then hey, I think you got to really be cautious about just telling no to that employee because it's not just about the law, it's about doing what's right sometimes, but I'm not going to preach to you about that. You've got to decide how you do that for your business, and every business is different. Is a positive test for COVID-19 a disability under the ADA? Probably not. Again, if it exacerbates an underlying health condition, then it could be. But in general, this isn't going to be an ADA thing that you have to worry about providing sort of accommodations for people if they have an event. The good news is if somebody does have a COVID-19 exposure or test positive and they get through it, they should be through it in 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and it won't be a long-term disability anyway. What if we have an employee who comes to work with symptoms? Is it legal? Or if they've traveled to a high-risk location, can we send them home to work? The law says absolutely yes. You do not have to let somebody come back to work if they've got symptoms or if they've traveled to a place that's a high risk. You can tell them, nope, you're not coming back for 14 days. You can also ask for a doctor's note before they return to work. So we're okay in Kansas doing that, Missouri doing that, our surrounding states doing that. You can also send home other employees that they've had contact with. As I said, we had an exposure here in our office. We sent the lawyer home who worked with that person. We sent the legal assistant home who that lawyer then spent the whole next day in the rooms planning and doing stuff with. We want to try and avoid panic and not scare everybody in your office and try to reassure them that we're sending home those that are situation and telling them, look, if you've got a high-risk situation and you're really concerned, let's have a conversation about it. But in general, we did what we need to as an employer. We sent those home that were exposed or had a first-degree removed exposure, and we think our workplace is otherwise safe. Other guidance that I'm getting a lot of questions on. If an employee calls in sick, can you ask them questions like, are you having chills? Are you having a cough? Do you have shortness of breath? Do you have a fever? You can ask them the questions that relate to whether it's COVID-19 likely. That's why I put that information up front for those of you who have not seen it. It is not against the law to make those kind of medical inquiries that sometimes you can't make under the ADA. You can ask them about this. This information, by the way, are the exact question and answers, word for word, pulled off of the EEOC website that I cited to you above that you can go and get as well. There's additional questions by the EEOC. When may an employer take a body temperature? I've got a lot of clients that are doing this now. As employees report to work, they take their temperature. 2 weeks ago, the answer to this would have been, that is illegal, you cannot do that. The EEOC changed its guidance to cover this situation. If you want to take employees' temperature before they come into your workplace, you can do so. The one requirement you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do that in a private setting. So you can't have a line of employees out the door and you test them one by one and say, okay, you can come to work, you go home. You got to try and do that in a way that preserves their privacy. So in a separate room, something like that, but you legally can do that. Can we require if they have symptoms? Again, absolutely yes. When the employee returns to work, can you require a note? The answer is absolutely yes. There are a series of other questions that are available on this website, but those are the key ones for you to mostly be that I'm getting from a lot of my clients. Are there discrimination issues? Unfortunately and thankfully, the president quit doing this. He was calling it the Chinese virus as opposed to what it is, which is a nationwide pandemic. And I've had a lot of clients, none in Kansas, thankfully, that were discriminating because they somehow misunderstood that people of Asian descent were more likely to have that. The EEOC said they are really going to be looking seriously at any kind of discrimination brought against people under this circumstance. So that is obvious to all of us, and I don't believe anybody on this call would ever do that, but I'm pointing that out to everybody because this is directly from the EEOC. What about workers' comp? Will you get workers' comp claims if somebody says, I got exposed to this at work? In Kansas, and in most places in Kansas, we are not enough of a hot spot that somebody could try to make the claim that they got it at work. It is possible, however, if you have an employee who gets it, that they could make that assertion, and you'll have to go through your normal healthcare providers or your workers' comp providers, excuse me. But in most places, I think this is going to be a low-risk issue in Kansas, but I have had several people ask that question in my healthcare clients in Kansas, particularly those on the east side of the state here where I am, where we are getting a lot, unfortunately, the hospitals are starting to spike up in people that are reporting, and the healthcare providers are starting, and their employees are starting to be more concerned about that issue. But for most people on this call, I think that's a minimum risk. What is OSHA requiring on this thing? OSHA is taking a very, very limited role in this for the most part. If we think due to the specific nature of your health places, and for the most part that's going to be healthcare at this time, then you do have to furnish under the general duty clause a workplace that is free from recognized hazards. If you have somebody on your day one that tests positive, then yes, you may very well have to go take extensive measures to sanitize your workplace if you are going to ask employees to come back to that workplace. That's the 72-hour rule I mentioned earlier. This virus can survive for up to 72 hours, they're saying, on hard surfaces. So would that mean a complete wipe down with Clorox and the right kind of sanitizing wipes of workplaces? By all means, yes, you could be required to do that. So that is something that if you have an exposure, you may have employees react to that. If you're doing this, if you're continuing to operate, the OSHA has issued guidelines with the CDC. If you're a higher risk employer, what can you do to maintain your operation? So this is when I urge you to go to the CDC and look at their guidelines. I did not want to try and summarize that here more than I did, because that is such a significant issue that has come up, and every employer is different. What can you be doing to promote reduction in this kind of situation that we're dealing with? These are all the things that we're talking about here in your workplace. I talked about them briefly. Hand washing. If you're sick, stay at home. If you cough into your elbow. Don't use somebody else's desk. Don't use somebody else's phone. If you go to the common spaces, such as the cafeteria in your place, wipe it down when you leave. If you go out the door and have an access to a door handle that the public had access to other employees to, go back to your desk and hit yourself with hand wipe or wash your hands before you do that. That is the kind of thing that OSHA is telling people to do. Communicate these rules as you do it. Try and train your employees if you're changing stuff as you go along, is what we're talking really about here. If you have an employee, and again, I'm going through these fairly quickly because I do want to get your questions, and I will go beyond the 1 hour we have slotted for this to answer questions. But if you do have somebody that says, hey, I tested positive, it could be a OSHA required if they can trace it back to your workplace. So be prepared. Those kind of nuts and bolts things under OSHA would still apply if we're doing it. Here is the one I'm hearing the most of. And this is, what if you get an employee who says, I believe our workplace is compromised. I believe that I have a significant risk of exposure at my workplace. I am not coming in. I will not work. OSHA does provide protections under 11C to some employee to refuse to perform services if they have a reasonable belief that their workplace is hazardous and their employer has not taken appropriate steps to alleviate or reduce and remove that hazard. For 90% of the people on this call or more, that is not going to be something that is out there. Again, maybe with an elderly employee or somebody who's got a higher risk and they're customer facing in such a way that they can't mean appropriate social distancing or whatever, maybe that could apply. But for most places, OSHA just is not going to prohibit you from telling employees you need to come to work. You've got that situation. So that is something that I've got a lot of questions on. The employee would have to prove all these things as part of it. So that's the legal standard there. So I hope in the hour that I covered here today, and I did try to keep it to an hour, so I know I moved quickly, we answered most or all of your questions that might come up as we go through this. But I'm going to go back to the top now and put my contact information. So if you do have follow-up questions, those of you who did not, don't have a chance to get them answered today, then I will do my best to get your questions answered. At this point, Maria, I'm going to pass it back to you unless there's a way you can put, maybe by clicking on this, I can get to the questions.
How about
I just did it.
Oh, you got him?
Yeah, I've got it to where I can answer the questions here.
Okay, so I have questions that are coming in through the Q&A, and then I also have these chats that are being sent over. Okay. I don't know if you can see both of those, but I've been putting them together while you've been talking. And okay. The first one is, does this apply to local government and municipalities?
And the answer to that is yes. Congress specifically said these new laws, the Family First coronavirus response, and the obligation to provide leave does apply to local governments and municipalities. I am not sure yet at this point if the reimbursement does as well. You may have to provide that out of your own tax dollars and pockets and then seek other ways to get help from the federal government on the money. But yes, the obligation to provide this leave does apply to local government and municipalities.
Okay. What about nonprofits, Tim?
Yes, nonprofits as well.
Okay.
Nonprofits are employers under this law.
With physicians that are limiting doctor's notes, what types of documentation are acceptable to determine whether a health condition is legitimate for both remote work and or FMLA leave?
Okay. And Maria, you're cutting out a little bit on me. I don't know if you are for everybody else, but I understand your question and got it. The doctor's note requirement is still very fluid. We do anticipate getting further guidance on what we can require, but right now what we believe it is sufficient to say, to have a note from a doctor that says, this employee was at my office seeking treatment related to symptoms that could have been coronavirus, and that's all it takes. It doesn't require a positive diagnosis. It just requires that they may have symptoms and they're going to seek treatment for such. So for the most part, the doctor's notes are going to be much more limited, and we just have to indicate that the employee was seeking medical advice and consultation related to coronavirus. In some instances, they do not have to visit the doctor. A lot of doctors are doing tele-advice right now as part of protecting their clinics from people coming in. So they seek diagnosis by the phone, and then the doctor sends them a note saying, I discussed this issue with my client remotely, or my patient remotely, here it is. So it's basically going to be a very simplified note from a doctor. Somebody did call in and say, we're doing a statewide shelter in place. What are the reasons you are opposed to this action? I personally am not opposed to it in any way. I don't think the governor will do that ultimately unless we see ramp ups. According to what the CDC is doing right now, in lower density places around the country, not just in Kansas, they are not recommending shelter in place exclusively because the risk of spread to areas where there's lower density is lower. So I don't have an opinion on whether we should or should not be doing this in Kansas. I'm just passing on to everybody on this call what the CDC is recommending, and it's more of a hotspot population density situation as opposed to any kind of thoughts that I have personally. So what's your next one, Maria?
Are there provisions for a shareholder to get unemployment without closing an S corporation?
Yes, there's two things that are pending. So if you are an owner, I am not sure what the new CARES Act has done, but the CARES Act that we don't have in front of us yet has a provision for you to continue the salaries of owners, whether it's a sole proprietorship or whether you're an independent or a self-employed or however we do it, for you to get money as well through the CARES Act process. Again, that isn't new law yet, so I'm not going to advise more than that at this point. Under the laws that have passed already, the Family First item, I am not sure. I do not believe that you would become entitled to unemployment as an owner as opposed to an employee if you're not also covered as an employee in your business. I don't know how you're set up. Unless I'll be honest with you, the law was just passed, so I don't know all the details. But check with the Unemployment Commission. I would urge you to wait to the end of the week so that we see what the CARES Act says, because that might refine this advice. But ordinarily, if you're just an owner and not an employee of your organization, you would not be eligible for unemployment. Hopefully that has changed as part of this new process.
If employees self-quarantine the week of March 16th, does this apply to them? Is it retroactive?
Fantastic question. It is such a good question that the Department of Labor felt the need to answer that on the Q&A that is on that website that I provide you guidance to. The answer that they provided is no. If they self-quarantined earlier, you were under no obligation to pay them or have them be out on time. And importantly, if you did provide them with that time off, they still get to take more time off under the law if they have a qualifying event after April 1st. So anything that you did before April 1st does not in any way count towards what happens after April 1st.
Okay. I have only 3 employees. Am I exempt from FMLA, or do I need to provide this service and sick pay? I own an auto shop and don't offer sick or vacation pay to employees.
Okay. Again, fantastic question. Short answer is yes. This law applies to any employer that has fewer than 500 employees. So you have to provide these new paid sick things that we've talked about on this program. You're not otherwise covered by the other FMLA stuff. But when it comes to these paid sick hours and paid sick paid FMLA time, if you have an employee who needs to take time off for these reasons, you will have to provide the stuff I talked about under those new laws today. Now, possibly, could you qualify and try and get yourself set up as a small business that is exempt from it because it could have significant financial impacts or ability on the long-term viability of your business? Yes, but you need to go through that process once it is set up by the government, and that is not finalized yet.
Okay. What about employers that have already released employees due to loss of business and economic survival? What are the employer obligations?
A fantastic question, and one that is very fluid. So, and that's one I've talked to dozens and dozens of companies about over the last 2 weeks, and I've urged those that could to try and wait to see how the law changes. But you are going to have options, and those options could significantly be driven by this CARES Act. As I said, the CARES Act's goal was to do two things. One, provide enhanced unemployment for people that are already laid off or that get laid off as we go through this crisis, so that those employees would get closer to their full wages for that time period, because that's going to happen. Some businesses just are not going to be able to continue functioning. But two, to provide a process where a small business could seek a loan from the Small Business Association that would basically cover their payroll period for a period of a couple months, and their mortgage, their rent, those kind of things. And that loan would be 100% forgiven, so that you would not have to pay it back, with the goal of not laying people off if you can, and keeping them on the payroll, furloughing them as you will, but keeping them whole so that you can have a situation where you're not in that situation that was just described. If you've already pushed them out on unemployment, the CARES Act, and I'm going to keep repeating this, I apologize, I'm sounding like a broken record. I don't know fully what it says yet, so I'm hesitant to guide you more than the basics I'm going to now. If you've already pushed them out, the CARES Act has provisions where you could pull them back and unlay them off or unfurlough them so that they're back at the work or under your payroll essentially, and then you get that reimbursement. So there are a lot of ways that may be available to you by Friday that you could say, okay, you got unemployment for these 2 weeks. I'm not going to undo things. You're just going to get that amount, and it's going to be a significantly enhanced amount. But as of X date, I want to return you effectively to work, and you will then be getting your full pay while you're on furlough, et cetera, depending on how you do it. So long answer to the question, but unfortunately I don't have all the guidance for you yet because I don't have the law in front of me yet. But I think you will be able to continue them on layoff for now, and you may be in a situation where you say, I'm going to pull you back. The main question you also have to ask yourselves is, what are we doing for health insurance for people during this period? Did you COBRA them, or did you work through your health care provider to say, no, we're not going to COBRA them? Are they going to pay their share of your premiums? Are you going to cover it for them? And then when they come back, deduct it from there. All of those are great questions that you'll have to be monitoring over the next 2 to 10 days.
The next question is, can FMLA be taken on an intermittent basis?
Excellent, fantastic question. Again, you guys are tracking exactly what the Department of Labor is getting, and the answer to that is yes. So let's just say you take off for 2 weeks to care for a child who's been kicked out of their school, and then you get a flare up, and down the road you come back to work because now the school's out and they're doing whatever they do and they're not out of school anymore. And now your daycare closes because you had an exposure and your kid's kicked out again. So yes, it can be on an intermittent basis for the paid FMLA component. For the paid sick leave or sick hours component, the 80 hours item also could be. You could have an employee who needs to go get tested right now because they got an event and they need to take 4 hours off. And then they come back to work after they test negative, and then down the road they got to take time off to care for somebody. So yes, both of these items, if you have a qualifying event, can be taken intermittently.
How about employers that pay weekly draws plus commission and 1099 employees?
Well, if they're 1099, they're contractors, so they're treated differently. Weekly draws and commissions, there is a special provision dealing with how you would determine the compensation for them. That is one that you need to talk with your accountant or your firm about on how you do that. But in general, they would look at a respective or a representative payroll period of time, and they would then get the amounts based on that representative period. What the person kind of averages per week is the way I would describe it, is how they're looking at that kind of thing. So that is how they're calculating it. There's another provision in there, by the way, under this Q&A. If somebody works a lot of overtime, would you factor that into their normal pay week? And the answer to that is yes as well. So you do have to great question, because it does vary based on what people are actually doing, not just a straight 40-hour work week times whatever the rate would be. The rate for many of you could be different than just some straight up flat hourly rate. So great question.
If employees are not usually offered insurance or PTO, as in a construction area, would you still qualify for the CARES Act?
Yes, the CARES Act is not just going to apply to insurance, PTO, any of that. The CARES Act, one more time with the broken record, I haven't read the final law yet, so we're going to have to do that. But the CARES Act is designed for any employer, if you're fewer than 500 employees, to be able to meet your payroll if you're experiencing this kind of situation. So even if you don't provide health insurance and you don't provide PTO or time off or anything else, this is designed to cover costs, your wages, your salary. So yes, this law will still apply to you once it becomes final this week.
Tim, what about churches?
You cut out on me there. What about what?
What about churches and their employees?
Ouch. You stumped the band there, but if you bear with me, let me turn back here and see how it applies to those kinds of employers. I might have to, in the interest of time, come back to that, because I have not had anybody look at it with regard to that. State employees. I'm going to have to double check that. I haven't looked at the law with that in mind, so I apologize to whoever that question was. I do not know if religious entities are covered by this at this point.
Okay, we'll get back to them.
I believe the answer is going to be yes, but that is one I definitely would want to check on.
In the entertainment industry, nightclubs, bars, things like that, you have employees, none of them are full-time. Do the guidelines for FMLA and sick leave apply to those businesses if your business was closed by civil authority on March 19th?
Sounds like we got somebody from the Kansas City area here who's going through what we are here. Short answer is this law, first off, doesn't differentiate between full-time and part-time. So if you only have part-time employees, you're still covered. So you absolutely would still be covered by this law if your business is such that your business model means you've got 100 part-time employees and no full-time. So the short answer is yes, this does apply to you still, and you would be covered employers. But here's a very interesting wrinkle that I don't know who this person is on. If you have laid all of these employees off such that they are not working for you at this time, when the law does become effective April 1, the law would not apply to those employees because they're not working. They're not actively there as opposed to active employees. So you may not be providing any of these paid benefits because they've all been laid off prior to the laws applying. Now one thing that you need to talk to your lawyer about is if you laid them off and said you're no longer working, then they are not covered as we're reading the law right now. They're not eligible for these benefits. However, if you furloughed them and said, look, I'm not going to lay you off. I'm just going to cut your hours. You're going to remain to be available as needed. And you're in the Kansas City area, which has gone through we're under quarantine now through mostly the end of April, most of April. that employee could then say, well, wait a minute, now I am subject to not coming to work. I could use my 80 hours. It wouldn't be the other event that we're talking about. But because unless they have kids, I mean, if they've got the kids out of school, I guess it could be the paid sick time. But yes, you could have the situation where, depending on how you've removed them from your workplace, they would become eligible for this on April 1st because we're under that situation.
On normal payroll deductions for insurance, child support, are those taken from sick leave or the FMLA?
Short answer is still yes. Those would be. Yeah, shoot. I'm gonna have to table that question as well. There is specific guidance on how you handle that. That is one that the Department of Labor said they would be answering through the regulations, because there might be some sort of formulaic approach to how you do that. But the short answer is you would probably still be honoring the normal garnishments that would be out there, but there's going to be guidance from that more specific. So I'm going to table that until we get that guidance from the regulations, which I hope will be at the end of this week or early next.
Now, Tim, should CHIPS be included in pay calculations for the Family First Law?
Should what be included?
Tips. If somebody receives tips as part of their position?
Yeah, there's special guidance on this for tipped employees. So if you look at probably the best way to look at that right now is the Q&A that was issued from the Department of Labor last night speaks very specifically to that issue. And essentially they do try to look at tips as well.
Okay. Can local governments, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, there's a special rule for tipped employees that you'd be looking at. And again, whoever that was, if you guys want to try and chat later today on what that rule is, I can pull that up, but I do not have that in front of me, and I've never done the math myself in my head how that works.
Okay. Can local governments make their employees exhaust their accrued time for COVID-19 exposure or when they are diagnosed with it and quarantined? Or are they required to give additional time, not dipping into what they've already accrued when they are ordered to quarantine?
Okay. In general, you cannot make them use their accruals before they use the benefits available under these new laws. What I do not know, because this law, and I haven't been talking to many public sector side folks, so I apologize for that. I have not looked at the law in depth as it applies to the public sector. So I don't know if there's some sort of exclusion that would allow public sector people to make them use accruals. I do not believe that is the case. The way this whole law was written, it says throughout that you cannot force them to do that. And I have not seen in my review of it a couple times anything that comes to mind that says public sector can carve that out and can make them use accruals. So I believe the answer to that is no. But I think that is something I would want to follow up on as well, because I'm not positive. I haven't looked at it specifically for those sectors.
Can employers lay off after April 1st? And if they do they still need to provide the new FMLA pay?
Short answer is yeah. There's nothing in these laws that say if you've got to close your operations that you cannot lay people off, or even if you're not closing the operations, if you're reducing. So the laws would say they do that. Once somebody is laid off, if they're not already on leave or getting these benefits, they would not be eligible for these benefits.
Okay. Does the 500 employee designation for the FMLA regulations refer to the total employee count for a corporation with multiple locations, or is that determined by the number of employees at each individual facility?
Yeah, the 500 employee per count for the purposes of these two new laws, whether you have more or less than 500, is not based on location. It's based entirely on the size of the corporation. So let's just say you've got 5 locations, each with 150 employees at them. Clearly, when you add them all together, there would be over the 500 number. If they're all part of the same corporate subsidiary, such that they're part of an umbrella corporation and they all report up there and they're really operated as a single enterprise, that's the legal test, then where the locations are don't make a difference. It's really how, pardon me, give me a long day, I'm losing my voice already. It's really whether you are a single enterprise from a legal standard, not where those locations are, and whether or not you're a single enterprise under that legal standard is something that would require a substantial conversation with your attorneys.
What is the significance of the language 100% forgivable loan as opposed to calling it a grant?
Again, that's talking about the CARES Act, which I have not seen the final text as yet. My belief in the reason they did it is to allow a process whereby these monies could be dispersed around the country through the SBA, through an efficient program they've already got in place, and not having to come up with some sort of process whereby they allocate grants or whatever. So I believe that is why they're utilizing that mechanism. The terminology and stuff, I think, is linked to those laws, but that is why I think they're doing it the way they're doing it. Just like with the new paid FMLA and paid sick days benefit, they linked it to the FMLA, and it doesn't fit nicely with the FMLA, but the government did it to expedite getting these things out there and start helping people, as opposed to creating brand new laws.
And once the CARE Act becomes effective, would you be doing another webinar that will be explaining all of that?
I'll work with Paul and Maria who set this one up to do some sort of update and advice. That is going to be so narrowly targeted. I doubt that it would warrant any kind of lengthy webinar. In all likelihood, first off, I'll do whatever you guys need. I mean, Paul and Maria know that. I've already told them that before we all got on this call. This is such an emergency. We're not, as you know, this is all at no fee, no charge. So I will do whatever you guys ask me to do. If we don't need to do it because it is something that really, if you get it in a written guidance format or something like that and work through the SBA or the SBDC, you won't need it. But if you need it, I'd be happy to.
Okay. In the hospitality industry, when you have employees or a hotel with limited housekeeping, they are hourly when needed, have a spa and salon. Spa is totally commission. Does the Act have a guideline for part-time commission staff?
Yeah, what we're talking about there is, and really what we're dealing with. I'm not going to talk about the CARES Act. I don't know what it's going to do for that. But for the paid FMLA and the paid sick days law, what your question really asking about is how much would they get from this if they're out on a paid FMLA leave? How much do I pay them? The law does have a provision to calculate commissions and tips into what their regular rate would be, so that you could be paying them full reimbursement for what they're out, not just what they were out on an hourly basis. And that is something that we would get very, very clearly more guidance on from the Department of Labor over the next, hopefully, couple days.
And Tim, in regards to municipalities and local governments who are seeking help for reimbursement, who is it that they would speak to about that?
For reimbursement from the federal government?
Correct.
What you're dealing with there is, I just don't know that right now myself. I apologize because I haven't looked at you, but I would start. I don't know what type of municipality we're talking about here, but typically I would start by asking your local attorney. Most municipalities have an attorney that would apply, like that's on their payroll, like their city attorney or whatever the case may be, and they would be up to speed on that. But I can look at that. I just apologize. I haven't looked at that because I've been focusing on the private sector so much. I normally would know that answer, and I apologize for not. But if we can't get that answer to you after this call, then talk to your local attorneys who you normally get your advice from on this stuff, and they should know it as well.
Tim, this one is in your area, and I think it's a great outline. They're in Johnson County. The business is not considered essential. As of yesterday, employees cannot work. Due to the stay-at-home order, can you kind of detail out what that first 2 weeks looks like? Assuming they don't have any kids at home, they're not ill, they have not been exposed. Will they be paid 100% the first 2 weeks? Will they be paid for weeks 3 and beyond through these programs? And if so, at what rate?
Yes, great question. anything that has happened up until April 1st, you just basically will ignore. The law does not become effective till April 1st. So after April 1st, when Johnson County, Kansas does both become subject to this new law, that the Family First Coronavirus, it's hard to say, it's not easy to have an acronym for, which would be providing the paid sick hours and obviously the stay-at-home quarantine order through the county, the Johnson County. So at that time, they would become eligible for the full paid amount, the lesser of 2/3 of their pay. Actually, let me work back and walk through that. They would get the greater of their full paycheck, or $551 for 80 hours in Johnson County starting April 1. That's how it would work, and then that would apply for the 80 hours of time off, or if they're part-time, whatever their normal work week is, for the next 2 weeks after, or for the next 10 days after April 1, which would basically cover them at their pay through, I guess, roughly whatever 10 days is of that period of time. 80. I say 10 days. What really be is through 80 hours. So 80 hours of pay continuation starting April 2nd.
Okay, I'm thinking about voluntarily closing for 2 or more weeks. If I do this, would it be better to have employees file for unemployment, take advantage of the CARES Act, or would this be a situation where I'd have to pay them for the 80 hours of pay time under the emergency paid sick leave, or can I just let them take 2 weeks off unpaid? Also, if employees have to file for unemployment, what does that do for unemployment taxes to be paid?
Yeah, those are going to be that's a lot to unpack in that question. Probably more than I have time for. That was my call telling me to get ready to prep for my noon call. So I'm running out of time here. That's one that there are so many. First off, that's a fantastic question. That question really goes to what I'm spending most of my time talking to employers about, on how do we balance utilizing the unemployment, how do we balance using our paid benefits, how do we balance the paid FMLA requirements, and the CARES Act that we don't know about. Those are 4 levers out there that are going to be unique to your business. Whether you go into a full shutdown mode, again, broken record, the CARES Act may indicate you don't need to do that if you're going to get paid that money back. I'm not going to be able to advise you on that. But many employers are looking at to say, okay, if I can furlough my employees, keep them economically whole, and get reimbursed by the federal government for that, then I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to shut down. Technically, nobody may be at work, but you're not shut down. If my business is such that I really have got to go immediately into a layoff mode, and I can't do it, then I may need to be doing that. Whoever that is who made that question, I'd be happy to discuss that with you, but on this setting, I really can't get enough facts to go over how I would advise you to do your specific business. Particularly, what I would encourage you to do is wait 24 hours. That's how this stuff is moving so quickly. With the CARES Act and whatever it provides, that is going to dramatically possibly change how I would advise you specifically to handle your reduction in hours of your staff or your business. And I do apologize, Maria. Are we getting close to the end of the questions? Because I do have this.
You have knocked out 95% of them,
Okay.
and I want to be respectful of your time. So what I do want to let everybody know is I'm getting questions for the slide that has all of the links on it. We are going to send this out to everyone. So rest assured, you will get that in your email. And then I think there may have been 3 questions we did not get to. Tim can see those. I'm going to find out how he can collect all of those, and he'll know just by how we've gone through these, which ones that we were not able to get to, and hopefully we can get your question answered. I want to thank everybody, and should you have any questions regarding the small business disaster loans, please contact your local SBDC advisor who can guide you through that process, as well as any information in regard to ag exemptions. Please contact your SBDC and they will work through those with you. Thank you again, and thank you, Tim, for doing this for the SBDC.
Absolutely. Paul and Maria, thanks you for all your help coordinating the technology. And again, sorry, folks, I couldn't cover everything. It's such a moving target, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to let me know.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks. Bye.